Imagine, for today's history lesson, waking up one morning and discovering that half the people you know are simply gone. Your neighbors, your co-workers, the baker, the blacksmith, the tax collector. Well, actually, maybe that last one isn't the worst example. Welcome to Echoes of Everyday, where we explore history's lessons for today. This was Europe in the middle of the 14th century. The Black Death killed somewhere between 30 and 50% of Europe's population in just a few years. Entire villages disappeared, fields were abandoned, church bells rang so often they eventually stopped ringing altogether. It was one of the greatest disasters in human history. And yet, it accidentally made life better. Now, before anyone reaches for the pitchforks, let's be very clear. The plague was not a good thing. Millions suffered unimaginably. Families vanished, children became orphans overnight, communities collapsed. And if you had the choice between preventing the Black Death or enjoying its long-term benefits, you would prevent the plague every single time. But history has an odd habit of creating opportunities from catastrophe, and the survivors found themselves living in a completely different world. To understand why, we have to rewind a little. Before the plague arrived, medieval Europe had a problem. Too many people. For centuries, Europe's population had been growing. More mouths, same farmland. Landlords owned enormous estates. Peasants competed fiercely for tiny plots of land. If one worker complained, there were 10 others ready to replace him. Sound familiar? Labor was cheap. Workers had very little bargaining power, and most peasants were tied to the land they worked. Many couldn't simply pack their bags and look for a better employer. Your lord dictated much of your life, and then came the plague. Within only a few years, Europe's labor force collapsed. Imagine your company suddenly losing 40% of its employees overnight. Projects stop, orders pile up, nobody answers emails. The coffee machine still works, but there's nobody left to refill it. That's essentially what happened across Europe. Except instead of software projects, it was food production. Suddenly, there weren't enough people to harvest crops, or repair roads, or build houses, or shoe horses. Workers became incredibly valuable, and for the first time in generations, landowners needed peasants more than peasants needed landowners. And that changed everything. If your lord refused higher wages, you could often walk to another village where someone desperately needed workers. For centuries, ordinary laborers had almost no leverage. Now they had options. Employers started competing. Wages rose, living standards improved, and workers could negotiate. Something previously almost unthinkable. Naturally, the ruling classes hated this. In England, the government passed the Statute of Labourers in 1351. It attempted to freeze wages at pre-plague levels. Imagine your government announcing, "Congratulations on surviving the worst pandemic in history. You're officially forbidden from asking for a raise." Needless to say, people ignored it wherever they could. Because laws don't magically create workers. You can't legislate population back into existence. Supply and demand doesn't care how impressive your royal seal looks. The shortage remained. Employers kept paying more and workers kept moving. The economy quietly changed underneath the law. The plague also weakened one of medieval Europe's defining system, feudalism. For centuries, society had been built around obligations between lords and peasants, land in exchange for labor, and protection in exchange for service. But when labor became scarce, those old arrangements became much harder to enforce. Many peasants bought their freedom. Others simply left. Some towns actively encouraged migration by offering opportunities unavailable in the countryside, and cities suddenly looked much more attractive. If you've ever wondered why medieval towns began growing in importance, the Black Death is part of that answer. Then something even more interesting happened. Land became abundant. Think about that for a moment. The amount of farmland barely changed. The number of people working it almost halved. Suddenly there was room. Families could acquire larger plots. Some moved onto abandoned farms. Others negotiated better rental agreements because landlords had empty land generating no income. For ordinary survivors, housing became easier to obtain. Imagine hearing that sentence in today's property market. It almost sounds like a fantasy. And diet improved too. When populations crash, pressure on food supplies often eases. Meat became more available in many regions. Workers could afford better diets. Archaeological evidence even suggests average nutrition improved in several parts of Europe after the plague. It's one of history's strangest twists. A catastrophe reduced the population so dramatically that surviving people often ate better. Not because the food production became more efficient, because there were simply fewer mouths to feed. Labor shortages also encouraged innovation. If workers were plentiful and cheap, why invent machines? But when labor becomes scarce, suddenly efficiency matters. Historians believe the post-plague world accelerated the adoption of labor-saving technology, better water mills, improved agricultural techniques, more specialized production. Necessity became the mother of invention. And there's a lesson hidden there that's surprisingly modern. Technology often advances fastest when labor is expensive, not when it's cheap. But perhaps the biggest change wasn't economic. It was psychosocial. For centuries, society had appeared fixed. Everyone had their place. God had ordained the hierarchy. Kings ruled, nobles governed, and peasants obeyed. Then a tiny bacterium arrived on fleas riding black rats and ignored every social class. Rich, poor, priest, merchants, children, nobody was guaranteed safety. The illusion that society was permanent began to crack. People questioned authority. They questioned religious institutions that couldn't explain the disaster. They questioned old assumptions. The world suddenly felt changeable. Many historians see the Black Death as one of the many forces that helped pave the way towards the Renaissance. Not because the plague caused artistic genius, but because it shattered confidence in the old order. When people realize the world can change, they begin imagining different futures. Of course, none of this happened overnight. Recovery took generations. Many regions suffered repeated outbreaks. Entire families disappeared forever. Economic gains were uneven. Some places benefited more than others, and not everyone became wealthier. History isn't a movie where tragedy is neatly rewarded after 90 minutes, but the overall direction is difficult to ignore. Higher wages, greater mobility, better diets, more bargaining power, weaker feudal control, more innovation, more opportunity, and ironically, one of humanity's greatest disasters gave ordinary survivors something they'd rarely possessed before: choice. It's an uncomfortable truth. History doesn't always move forward because people make wise decisions. Sometimes history changes because circumstances make the old system impossible to maintain. The Black Death didn't create a better society on purpose. It simply removed enough people that the balance of power shifted. Workers became scarce. Scarcity creates value. Value creates leverage. Leverage creates change. It's a brutal equation, one written in millions of lives. So, no. The Black Death wasn't a blessing. It was a catastrophe beyond imagination. But for those who survived, it accidentally broke a system that had trapped generations before them. And sometimes, history's greatest transformations don't begin with brilliant ideas. They begin with events nobody would ever choose. That's what makes history so fascinating. Not because disasters are good, but because humanity has an extraordinary ability to build something better from the ruins. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this exploration, consider leaving a like and subscribing. It really helps the channel grow and lets me keep making videos like this. If today's topic gave you a new perspective, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Until next time, this is Echoes of Everyday, history's lessons for today.